have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Mia. So Mia is a traveling teacher, a mental health advocate, and an aspiring travel coach. She works as an ELS instructor virtually and in person, and her students that are virtual come from all over the world. She has taught in many places, such as Japan, like we'll be talking about today, rural Georgia, to Thailand. And besides traveling, she has recently become a drone pilot. So many exciting things. So Mia, I will turn it on over to you and excited to hear and learn from you today.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And I'm really happy to be with you all today. Let me pull up my presentation. And first off, I just want to say I love this community so much. You guys are all so supportive and sweet. So thanks for taking the time to come and learn about Japan. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if you can see this okay? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to share about my experience living and working in Japan as an English teacher. I saw in the chat a lot of you have not been to Japan or taught in Japan. So I'm excited to introduce my experience to you. I'm just sharing my perspective as an English teacher from 2015 to 2016, and then I went back again in 2019 for about 6 months. So all of these stories or things I'm going to share are from my experience, but everyone has a different experience abroad, as you all know. And if you all want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is Mia on the Map. So yay, let's go to the next slide. So today you're going to learn a little bit about me, what it's like teaching in Japan, so the hiring process, and a day in the life of an English teacher. And then you'll learn a little bit more about traveling in Japan. So a little bit about me. I am a travel lover, obviously. That's why I love this community so much. My first trip was to Costa Rica when I was 12, and after that, I was hooked. Wanted to see the world as much as possible. So I attended Hope College, which is in Holland, Michigan, and during my time there, I studied African politics, international studies, and Spanish, and I studied abroad in Cape Town, South Africa. I wanted somewhere that was really different from any place I'd ever been and a place that would kind of challenge me, which is also why I liked Japan as well. And do note, I didn't graduate with an education degree or an English major, so you don't have to have those things to teach in Japan. I got hired to teach in Japan during my senior year. So I used to work in the study abroad office in my college, and my boss at the time said, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing with your life yet? Like, you should go to these interviews that they're hosting for a private conversation school in Japan." So I went just to practice interviewing. And I sat through an info session, and they were showing pictures of this small town in Japan and videos of the classes. And I just thought, wow, this sounds like the best idea. I really want to go. And so I signed up for an interview that same day, and I had to do a 10-minute mock lesson, which was being recorded. And I got the job, and my life has changed since that moment. So I'm excited to share some more about that. Type in the chat. Let me know if you speak Japanese at all. There are some phrases down here you can practice and maybe some secret messages. But a little bit about Japan. The language is Japanese, and there are 125.8 million people. And the largest or most populated city is, anyone know? It's Tokyo. It's Tokyo. They have a parliamentary government with a constitutional monarchy. Don't ask me about politics because I don't know how to answer, but they do have an emperor and a prime minister, which is really interesting. It's a mountainous island nation, so it's about 70% mountains in Japan. So if you like hiking or winter sports or nature, Japan is amazing. It's comparable to New Zealand, I think, in some ways, but and there are 4 main islands, but 7,000 smaller islands. Most of them are not inhabited, though. The currency is Japanese yen, and it's a collectivist culture. So you know that you'll notice when you go, um, most people put the group ahead of themselves. So I'm American. I'm very independent. In American culture, people kind of tend to put themselves first, but in Japan, it's really important to think of others. This you'll see if you're on public transportation. It is pretty silent because people don't want to be rude to others. People don't eat pungent food on the trains or buses because they don't want to affect someone else who may not like that smell. So some things to keep in mind. I want to know what you know about Japan. It could be anything from, oh, I've had sushi once, to I also have lived in Japan. I want to hear all about your experience, and feel free to share your expertise in the chat as well. So we're going to start with teaching in Japan. If you are interested in teaching in Japan, some requirements for getting hired. You'll need a bachelor's degree, so from a four-year college or university, and a TEFL certificate usually. I actually didn't have this when I started and I still got hired. Yay. But I do recommend it, especially if you've never taught before. You'll get some good training in a different TEFL program. You'll need to be a native English speaker, and they're a little strict on this. So speakers from the UK, USA, Canada, South Africa, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, those countries. And if you are not from those countries, it's not impossible to find a teaching job, but it's going to be a little tricky. You'll also need a clean background check and a drug screen before you go. Little side note, if you have any medical issues and you're bringing like medications to Japan, make sure you check ahead of time to see if there are any problems or if it's accepted. Yeah, definitely something to check beforehand. And then you'll need some savings for your first month. So if you start a teaching job or any job in Japan, it will be about a month until you get your first paycheck. And Japan is very cash-based. They don't use credit cards a lot. So you'll need to carry cash with you. I remember bringing, I think it was like $2,000 in cash to Japan, and I was so nervous at the airport carrying that money with me. But this is something that a lot of people recommend ahead of time to have enough cash for that first month. And in Japan, when you get an apartment, they have something called like key money, and it's kind of like a deposit, except you don't get the money back and it's a little more expensive. So something to keep in mind. And if you have any questions about any of that, I'm happy to answer it afterwards. For the job search, there are a couple of ways you can go about finding a job in Japan. Some of these are just for teaching. So Dave's ESL Cafe is a popular one for teachers. Jobs in Japan and Gaijinpot have a whole bunch of different types of jobs. So these are very popular. I've had a lot of friends who've gotten hired to work in Japan through Gaijinpot in particular, and not just as a teacher. I've had friends who've done bartending. I've had another friend who worked for Toyota in the States, and he was relocated to Japan. So there's a lot of avenues for you to take to get to Japan. You can also connect with, even if you're long graduated, connect with your university again and contact people in career services or the International Education Office. Usually people have connections. You can join a Facebook group. So for Japan, there's a Facebook group called TEN, T-E-N, Tokyo Expat Network, and they are often listing job postings. They can even help with moving or any advice or questions you may have beforehand. That's a good place to ask those questions. And if you go through a TEFL or TESOL program, usually there's hiring help after that. So those are a couple of ways you can find a job independently, or you can apply to a program. And let me know if you know anyone who's done the JET program before. This is when most people think of teaching English in Japan, they think of JET. It stands for Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, and it is really amazing. I'm going to talk more about this a little bit later. And then another option is Interact, which is like JET, but you'll be more often placed in rural areas and in public schools. So we'll get into that in a second. Couple of options. Let's look at the differences in schools. So there's a public school. You could work in a public school, and these are nice because you'll have more regular teaching hours. So if you've ever taught before, that means like 8 to 3 in the classroom usually. And the public school schedule. You'll follow this schedule, which is really nice because there are a lot of holidays in Japan. So you'll have a lot of random days off. So that's really nice. It's a little bit different if you work for a private school. You can teach K through 12, and in public schools, the classes are a bit larger. So that's one option. Second option is called an eikaiwa, and this is a private school. I think of this more like a business. So this is where I worked in an eikaiwa. It's a tuition-based English conversation school, and you have the option to teach children or adults or both. So I did both in my company. And the classes are usually smaller, which I love. It's great. My smallest class was 1 student, and my biggest class was 18. It was like 18 high school boys, which was a lot of energy. And this is different because it's kind of like an after school, so your hours will be later. So I worked my official hours were from 2 to 10 p.m. So the high school students had their classes end at 10 p.m. And then after that, your day is basically done. But if you like having more flexible afternoon time or morning time, this might be a better option for you. And then usually when there are holidays for the public schools, you might not get those off at a private school because it's like extra school. People are paying money for it. So yeah, I taught through a lot of holidays, but we had holiday parties too. So I'll show you about that in a second. International schools are a great option. They usually require a teaching license. So if teaching is like your career path, you're set, this is a great path to go on, as is university, which to teach in a university, you usually need a master's or PhD, and you can go through Westgate Recruiting. They help a lot of people find university jobs. Programs, the JET program. So I haven't done this, but it's a great program, especially just to have that experience. Usually you're pretty immersed in Japanese culture because you're placed in usually public schools, but private is an option too. And you may be the only expat or foreigner in that school or even in that city. So it's a really good way if you want to learn a language fast or the culture. It's a good option. You can't really choose a location. You can share your preferences and they'll do their best to place you. It's competitive, especially now there are a lot less positions open for teachers. So apply ahead of time. It has a good salary depending on where you're based. So rural areas, you'll have a smaller salary. Urban areas, your salary will be higher, and you'll be an assistant language teacher, an ALT. So you won't really have your own classroom, at least for the first year. You'll be supporting the Japanese teacher who's teaching English, and you'll be there to help with pronunciation or grading homework, things like that. So there's less teaching hours, a little bit more desk time. So depending on what you like, these could be good options for you. Interact is very similar, and they like it when you can drive because they will place you in an urban area, or sorry, a rural area. So they may want you to drive a longer distance to get to your school. And then if you do a private school, these are some like chain schools. These are known all throughout the country. I didn't do any of these, but it's an option if you're looking. And another option, this is my first presentation with the Nomadic Network. You can teach online. So Japan is pretty expensive, so make sure you do have a good remote job set up if you want to go that path. These are a couple of platforms you could teach on. And if you speak a language other than English, you can work for italki or Preply. I take Japanese classes on italki right now. It's great. And these are nice because you have a lot more flexibility with your schedule. You can teach and travel. There's a quick hiring process. Just don't advertise it when you go to get a visa. You're there as a tourist. Okay. So speaking of the visa process, for a work visa, it can take up to 6 months. So I cannot stress it enough. If you want to work in Japan, apply very far in advance. This is to your advantage. You will send in your documents, and then anyone who, if you are a student or if you're working, you need a certificate of eligibility. This is kind of like a letter from the company saying, okay, we've hired this person to work here. She's good to go. And after that, then you can apply for a visa. And they'll list you, if you teach English, as a humanities specialist or international services, which I think sounded pretty cool. The work visa is valid for 1 year, but I've heard people get 5 years, so just depends. And then a tourist visa, you don't need this if, at least for US passport holders and a few other countries, if you're there for less than 90 days. You just need to show an onward ticket that's before those 90 days. And sometimes they require a bank statement for you to show that you can support yourself. Also, look how cute these kids are. I got permission to share some of these photos, and I'm just really excited because these kids just made my experience so wonderful. A little bit about teaching in an eikaiwa. This is different for every school. So this is from my school. Some of the benefits, I was reimbursed for my flight, which is awesome. But if you do need to find a cheap flight, Scott's Cheap Flights is great. I'm sure all of you have used, or some of you have used that before. My company helped with moving assistance, so they already had a fully furnished apartment ready for me. They paid for utilities. They didn't pay for rent, but rent was only about $500. At least in rural Japan, that's how it was for me. And health insurance, you'll get health insurance, which is really great in Japan. We even had required health checks with the company. So we would go on like a field trip to the hospital. So they don't say clinic or doctor's office. So if somebody's sick, they might say like, oh, I went to the hospital, and it's usually not that serious. But you'll you can get yearly checks there to see how you're doing. I got a lot of my health checks done there because it was so affordable. And then you can also have a pension there. And if you leave the country, so if you work just 1 or 2 years, you can take all that money out of your pension, take it back with you, which is a really good sum of money. I also got a bike, and I biked to work every day. And then this is unusual, I think, but I had like 30 vacation days, and then extra like holidays on top of that. And a really wonderful cultural experience. I wanted to show you a little bit of comparison between my school. So this is about what I made per month, $2,356 versus a JET program, but it depends where you're placed. And it also depends on what your school is like. So I really had a lot of benefits with the private school I worked at, and I loved it. This is kind of a day in the life. So I would wake up at 10 because I wouldn't go to sleep normally until like 1 or 2. And before work, I would go to the supermarket or just walk around town, hang out with friends, catch up with people back home because of the time difference. That was a good time to do that. And then around 1:30, I would bike to the office. Bike ride was about 20 minutes. I loved it. Loved my little bike there. And at 2 p.m., I would prep for classes. So I would lay out all of the materials because if I had a busy day, I wouldn't have any time for dinner, and there was no break in between classes. So it was go, go, go until the end of the day. But on slower days, I would have time for a dinner break, and I would go to the convenience store and grab like a bento box or something small. And just note the classes around like from 3 to 7 were elementary school, and sometimes preschool students would come in. Those classes were so cute. And then in the evenings, I would teach middle school and high school students. And at 10 p.m., the teachers would clean up the school. If you work in a public school, the students clean the school. It's part of their duty. So after that, I would bike home. I would usually have a second dinner and some downtime. And this is a lie. I actually went to sleep at like 2, but just numbers. Um, Teaching hours, I taught about 35 hours a week. And then we had a weekly meeting every Friday. So this is what my small town looked like. If I took a walk before work, I would just wear whatever I wanted and enjoy the peaceful atmosphere. There were a lot of cool shrines and temples nearby, and a little cultural center here. I would go with my friend Ryan, and we would just do things to not think about work before work. There's also a ton of great cafes and in Japan. Please try them when you go. And then I would head to the office and try to make all my coworkers smile. It was great. So for work, we had different holiday parties, especially working in an English school. A lot of the kids in Japan know about Halloween and Christmas. They do celebrate in Japan, but it's more of a romantic holiday for couples, and people eat KFC and Christmas cake. But for our holiday parties, it would often be on a Saturday or Sunday. We would come into work and set up the school to look totally different and decorated, and we would play games. I love costumes, so I made a really shabby Christmas tree costume, and kids threw ping pong balls. They were decorating the tree by doing that. And we would also have like craft or snack time. And then I worked in like 7 different branches, so I traveled a lot for work, so I got to wear a different costume every time for Halloween. And then we had a Halloween party for the kids, everyone dressed up. And we also did an English camp during the summertime. It was 2 nights, basically like summer camp. If you've ever been to summer camp, we just played games. We had time to we had like a water balloon fight, and we did a rocket launch. And it was a really good time to hang out with friends, like your coworkers, and also get to know your students in a different way. A little bit about company culture. So something I learned right off the bat was there are a lot of drinking parties. They're called nomikai or bonenkais, like the end of the year party. But basically, whenever we had a new person in the company or when somebody would leave, you would go out and you would drink with your boss, and you would drink with your coworkers. And depending on who your boss is, sometimes it's like a little more nerve-wracking because of the formality, but um, I had the best time with my coworkers and with my boss, and I loved going to these. And if you don't drink, it's fine. But if you want to hear your name chanted while you're drinking beer, you'll get that chance at these parties. We also had weekly meetings just to kind of check in how the week was going. I actually really loved these because it's the only time I got to see all of my coworkers all in one place. Um, and travel to different branches. So I mentioned I worked in a couple of different places. So I love just getting to sit on the train, that commute time, and I was reimbursed for all my travel as well. Japan is kind of notorious for having harder work-life balance. So you should expect, no matter what your field is, to work longer than wherever you're working now. Um, and respect is a really big part of the culture, and especially company culture. When you're greeting people, hierarchies is you need to pay attention to that and how you greet someone, because there's different phrases you would use for your friends versus for your boss. Similar to here, but it's good to just take note. And bowing is something that I recommend studying up on a little bit before you go, how low you bow, how to greet somebody properly. This is something I learned a lot my first month. Also, don't put your hands in your pockets. Another weird tip I didn't know about until I started working there. And building community. So Japan can feel a little isolating sometimes. It's because it's so different. It was the only place I ever experienced um, culture shock. And so because of that, it was very nice to find different ways to connect with people. You can do this through your coworkers. So I would often host fun like monthly gatherings in my apartment because I had a pretty nice apartment and I just love connecting with people. So we would have like poker night, we did takoyaki, like cooking night, Christmas parties, and Facebook groups. So I actually met my best friend in Japan. Her name is Kana. We met on a language exchange group on Facebook before I even came to Japan. And once I got there, I found out she lived quite far from me. She lived in the northern island of Hokkaido, and her family, they're all rice farmers and tomato farmers, and they know how to make amazing food. But they let me stay with them for probably a total of a month and a half, and they just showed me the best time. So if you can get connected with um, people who are from Japan, like highly recommend it. Obviously, that's a really big part of living in Japan. Couch surfing is a great way to do that too. I know some of you have used couch surfing before. It's popular in Japan as well. Language exchange, clubs and hobbies. I love running. So they did like a night electro dash with a rave at the end. It was one of my favorite memories. I went with my coworker Paola and we just had the best time. And then my friend Kana, her son does karate or karate. And so I got to be a part of his classes sometimes. And then, yeah, your local international center, there may be one in your city, so definitely get connected with them. And let's move on to travel in Japan. So before you go, here are some apps that have really saved me. Obviously, Google Translate. If you go to the supermarket, and especially if you're in a small town, it is very hard to see English written on labels. And I remember once I was trying to find flour and I accidentally bought powdered sugar because my Wi-Fi wasn't working or my SIM card wasn't working. And so you can use that app to just scan everything and see what you're buying. Imiwa is another app. It's kind of like a dictionary. It's more accurate than Google Translate because they'll give you some grammar points and some other options. Definitely have a currency exchange app just to help you out. There are a lot of working with bigger bills there, so it's good to keep in mind. Hyperdia is one that some people use for like train lines, bus lines, just to get the schedule. There's another app too that I will list in the guide you will get. And then Line. So I know many of you have probably used WhatsApp or just your basic iPhone, iMessaging. Line is what they use in Japan and they use it for everything. So definitely get that. And if you're going on a 2-week trip or more than that, you can get a SIM card at the airport as well as a little pocket Wi-Fi. I will say Wi-Fi is a little bit tricky in Japan. So definitely recommend researching that before you go. And if you're moving, how to set up Wi-Fi, and your school can help you with that too. Public transportation. I love public transportation in Japan. It's like almost always on time, and it's just a really great way to kind of learn about the culture because you get to just sit and like watch in a non-creepy way, but you get to sit and like people watch and see the city. And sometimes during the weekends, I would just buy a random ticket and sit on the train for a while and explore a new town. So before you come, if you're planning on just traveling, buy a JR pass. You have to buy this before you visit the country. This is just for like tourists. It is a more affordable way if you plan on traveling a lot to see the country. And when you're in Japan, if you're living and working there, or if you're just there for a short time and you don't get the JR pass, get a Suica card. This is like $5 and it's rechargeable, and you just swipe it and you'll get on trains, buses. You can even use it to buy things from the vending machine, which is nice. And Passmo is the other one. They're basically the same. Shinkansen. Okay, this is not for budget travelers, but you have to try it. It's so smooth and fast, and they have food on there as well. And it's a great way to experience something that's very popular in Japan, especially for business travelers. And for budget travelers, if you need to get somewhere farther away and you want to save money, they have night buses. I've had a lot of friends and I've taken a night bus before too. The buses are pretty comfortable in Japan, so that's another option. And then taxis, just a little side note, if you take a taxi in Japan, just know the door opens for you. Don't try to open the door. It pops open automatically and people might look at you funny if you like reach for the door. And taxi drivers dress very nicely, like white gloves, a suit. It's kind of fun to see. And places to visit. I thought about taking out this slide because, visit everywhere, like follow your heart. There's so many places to see and everything will be new and different. There's always something you can learn from wherever you're visiting. These are just a few places that I visited. Some popular places like Nara, which is where they have the deer, so you can like feed deer there. Kyoto, Osaka is another big one. A lot of big, Kyoto's more of like traditional culture that's shown, and Osaka is known for comedy and having funny people and takoyaki and okonomiyaki, which are really good foods to try there. Hokkaido, that's where my friend Kana lived. Hokkaido is known for dairy products and beautiful scenery. It reminds me, if you've ever been in Michigan, the climate is kind of similar to that. Their summers are they're not hot, they're perfect. Winters are freezing. So if you've seen a picture of Hokkaido, you might see a bus with a ton of snow coming up higher than the bus. It gets pretty cold in the winter, but all seasons, I recommend visiting Hokkaido if you can. And Meoto-iwa, this is where I spent New Year's. A lot of people have a New Year's tradition of going to a shrine or temple at midnight and then watching the sunrise in the morning. So that's one other place. And then Gero, this actually means like vomit in Japanese, sorry. But it's also the name of the city with amazing onsens. So these are just a few places. And I really like this quote. Whatever it is you're seeking won't come in the form you're expecting. So Japan is one of those countries that will totally rock your world in the best way. So wherever you go, I'm sure you'll have a great time. There are tons of holidays and festivals. This is one of my favorite parts about Japan. I love festivals. I love walking down the street and trying different street food. I wrote this down, I think there are over like 200,000 festivals in the country. Yep, 200,000 festivals a year. And that is because each city will have their own festival, and then most temples and shrines have their own festival. And there are about 190,000 temples and shrines in the country. And the reason why festivals are really fun, you can see people wearing traditional clothing like a yukata, which is kind of like a lighter summer version of a kimono. And it's just a great way to celebrate and have like a change of pace. So this festival, Tanabata, is like a star festival. I think it actually originated in China, but you write your wish for the year and you like put it on a little bamboo tree, and then there's a fireworks show, which is really great. Obon is a festival to honor the ancestors, and usually schools and work you'll have like a big vacation during this time. Sakura Matsuri, which is the cherry blossom festival. This is what most people know about Japanese festivals, cherry blossoms. It's in March, and people will grab their friends, grab some drinks, and just like sit and hang out underneath the cherry blossoms. It's great. You should definitely try to make it during that time too. And then New Year, I mentioned watching the sunrise, the first sunrise. I stayed up all night with my friends. We went to a temple. It was freezing, but they had really good street food and activities. And then we watched the first sunrise, and you can see like a small picture, but there were so many people around us. It was a really great experience. So if you've ever been to a festival in Japan, definitely let me know which one. And food, what everyone loves. So I want to know what food you know about in Japan because most people know sushi and ramen. Those are the two most common foods if you haven't been to Japan. But if you go, you'll know, oh gosh, there's just, I couldn't put it all on this tiny little slide. I hope y'all are gonna have lunch after this, but okonomiyaki is one of my favorites. It is kind of a savory pancake. You'll find it with seafood in it or sometimes pork belly. It's really delicious. And takoyaki or taco means octopus in Japanese. So there's octopus inside here and it's usually piping hot and just so good. Sashimi, the fish, just you can get really good sashimi even from the supermarket for very cheap. Tempura, which I crave all the time, and then onigiri is like a rice ball, and you'll find it with different things inside. This is what I would get if I needed like a quick meal or quick dinner. I would just grab this to fill me up temporarily. It's really good. And sweets. So this is a souffle cheesecake, but I just call it the fluffy cheesecake and fluffy pancake because they jiggle when you touch them. And there's a lot of conversation about whether this is real cheesecake or not, but I love this. I have other friends who say it's not cheesy enough, but got to try it out to find out. And then mitadashi dango. This is not caramel. I thought it was caramel when I tried it. It's more of like a peanutty taste. And you may also see other types of dango that's kind of rice flour and it'll be pink, green, and white on a stick. Anko is red bean paste, and they put this in a lot of desserts. Some people love it, some people hate it. Ichigo daifuku, ichigo is strawberry. So you'll find a lot of like fruit in mochi. And this is my favorite. I ate this all the time and gained like 15 pounds. It's great. And then each city and each prefecture has like their own special food that they highlight. My city was known for water. It was kind of called the water town. They had fresh water you could just drink out of the springs. This is mizu means water, mizu manju. So there's red bean paste in here and it's usually served over ice and you eat it during the summertime. Some unique aspects of Japan. Gosh, there's just so much I want to keep telling you, but limited time. Something I didn't put on here, they have a hyakuen shop, which is kind of like a dollar shop. And I just would end up spending like my paycheck on things like this and just walking around the dollar shop. There's a ton of cool things you can buy there. But we're going to start with onsen culture. So let me know if you know what an onsen is. Let me know in the chat. I can't read the chat, so I'm going to give you the answer. It's a hot spring. And this is a cultural experience that is so intimidating that you have to try, and you'll probably love it. If you have ever wanted to bathe naked in front of strangers, this is where you can do it. But their bathing or baths are really important in Japan. And if you go to an onsen, it's a hot spring, and it's divided up by gender, but they do have places where you can go mixed gender, but you're wearing bathing suits. But normally you'll be divided up and then you go into a locker room and you take off everything and then you're guided to this shower room and you're supposed to sit on a stool and rub and shower and rinse and get super squeaky clean. And if you're not super squeaky clean, somebody might be like, you need to sit there a little bit longer because we're all going to be using the same water in the hot springs or in the onsen. So after you shower, then you can choose. There's outdoor onsens, there's some that are inside, some that look like a little flower pot and you can sit in and feel like a sunflower. And they have different minerals, saunas. It's great. You have to try it. And I know they have something similar in Korea as well, in South Korea. So if you've ever been, let me know. Toilets, something else I kind of love about Japan. I know it's kind of weird to talk about toilets, but they have squat toilets. And for bathrooms like these, bring hand sanitizer. Sometimes there's no soap in the bathrooms. But for if you get a nicer bathroom with like a toilet like this, you're in for a real treat. There are heated seats. There's a music button that sometimes will play like birds chirping or a really loud waterfall just to be more discreet in the bathroom. There's these are self-explanatory, a bidet, spray, a stop button when you want these to turn off. And then sometimes there is an emergency button. And if you go into a bathroom with a toilet like this and there's no English, 'cause sometimes that happens, like I thought this was a stop button, but it was an emergency button, and I pressed it, and a little alarm went off. So they put that to assist the elderly if there's ever like, or if somebody just falls in the bathroom. But that's a great way to learn what different buttons mean by pressing them all, but I don't recommend pressing the red button unless you know it means stop. And moving on, vending machines and convenience stores or kombini. I love vending machines. I found out the US actually has more vending machines, but in Japan, they have, what is it, like more, the most vending machines in smaller areas. So you'll see, if you're in a smaller city, you'll see tons of vending machines. You can get anything from them. And like I said before, Japan is very cash-based, coin-based country. So you'll carry around a little coin purse, and I would often just buy things out of the vending machine. This is my favorite, royal milk tea. There's a Japanese supermarket in Chicago and LA. It's called Mitsuwa. You can get that there too. Red means hot, so you can get hot drinks, and blue is cold. You can buy full meals from vending machines. You can buy clothes. Depends where you are, but there's a ton of different things you can buy. And there will be kind of like a little arcade game. You'll see all the lights flash and a noise, and numbers will show up on the bottom. And if all the numbers match, you get a free drink. So that's what that means if you ever hear that noise. And then convenience stores are amazing. They're so convenient. You can pay your bills here, which is fantastic. You can buy medicine, you can buy delicious food, clothes. They're great. And there are a couple of different kinds. 7-Eleven is popular. Family Mart is really, they have really great chicken. And Lawson, they have really great drinks. So try them all. And the last bit, culture. Obviously, culture is a lot more than just these two pictures. But the Japanese tea ceremony is something I really liked trying. It was a great way for me to learn about all of the steps that go into tea, and the ceremony was just, it's hard for me to describe right now, but it's really special and I recommend trying it. Also, your legs may fall asleep and you may fall over in front of people. Just keep that in mind, like try to keep your legs awake because I fell over. Okay, and Kyoto is where a lot of people go if they want to check out traditional culture. You can even try on kimonos or yukatas. It's a very touristy now, not now during the pandemic, but these recent years, a lot of people go to Kyoto, but this is one of the temples you can check out. It's called Kiyomizu-dera, has a beautiful view. A couple other things, taking your shoes off in houses, bowing is another thing to learn about. There's a great book I recommend called Learning to Bow. It's pretty, shares a lot of aspects of what it's like to be an English teacher in Japan. And that is my presentation. It was a lot. Thanks for listening. I have more to share, but I'll send those to you in a guide afterwards. And I just want to thank you all for coming to learn about Japan. I hope you learned something. In Japanese, arigatou gozaimasu. You can sign up for my email list at miaonthemap.com if for some reason that doesn't work. This is my email, and I use Instagram the most, so feel free to reach out with any questions. And that is it.
Mia, incredible. Oh my gosh. And I'm sure you can now see the chat box, but wow, I know for me, the way you explained it all makes me want to go teach English, go visit, go live there, eat some food, have fun at the vending machines, you name it. So it was so well done. So yay, I'm so excited. And I know everyone feels the same too. I got a couple messages privately just about how amazing you are. And we need to have like a part 2. to continue. Yeah,
Thank you guys.
it
That's
was
really nice.
really, really good. But we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to
Perfect.
start asking away. So we actually had quite a few just regarding the whole teaching process and some specifics around that. So the first one, Skylar was curious, in researching all the TEFL courses, there's so many out there. Are there any particular ones that you really recommend?
Yes. So there's the International TEFL Academy, I think is what it stands for. It's ITA. They have some really good programs. And Teach Away, check out their website. They've all got programs listed as well, and I trust them. I did podcasts with them, so check out Teach Away or ITA for TEFL programs,
Okay.
and reach out directly to me if you can't find what you're looking for.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good reminder. Everyone, I've put Mia's contact info a couple times now in the chat, so you can always direct message her, email, whatever you need to get in touch. So Marvin had a question about, do the schools or the non-JET programs have age limits?
60, I believe, is the max age. I think it's 60 for the JET program at least. But I did meet some teachers who were in their 60s teaching. So sometimes if you just work directly with the school, you may be able to work around that. And then minimum age, I would guess, I mean, you have to have your bachelor's degree. So probably 21 is the minimum. Don't quote me on that though. Double check.
Okay, but you do need a bachelor's degree?
Yes.
Okay.
To teach.
To teach, right. Okay. Let's see. We have another question on what are the options for commitment? So like 3 months, 6 months, a year, are there different ranges around that?
Ooh, okay. The contract for teaching, the contract is most likely going to be 1 year. And you can, with the option to re-extend. JET program, I believe is, you can do it for 2 years, and then I think you can keep extending more. I can reach out to my friend. And then they have, sometimes they need last minute teachers. So the second time I went to Japan, I was requested to come as a substitute teacher for my former company. So if you know people or just ask around, you can work out shorter term contracts usually.
Okay, sounds great. Farah, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, is curious how much fluency in Japan was needed as part of your daily school interactions.
Oh, so I had studied Spanish and I just thought, oh, what a great new adventure. I really wish I had prepped some basic Japanese before going. Japan was not surprising, but there's very limited English used. And I think a lot of it is people know English, but don't want to make a mistake. So it's very useful to know some phrases, but I just had learned thank you, and I accidentally said gracias my first day. So you can learn quickly, especially if you're in a smaller town, but people understand too. You may not come with any Japanese. It's a great way to learn. So yeah.
Right, exactly. Just like wherever you travel, try to pick up a couple little phrases before you go. Okay, I just saw another question come through from Farah, so I'm going to address that. And
Okay.
it's, can you talk a little bit more about the daily lesson planning that you did?
So it varies from school to school, but I had a pretty thorough training. And there was a set curriculum. So they had the lesson plans prepared for me. I just had to lay out like the materials. Some people are teaching more independently and coming up with their own lessons. So if you're not familiar with lesson planning, that's why doing one of those TESOL programs is amazing, because that's a huge part of that training. And I also see Guillermo has mentioned having 150 plus hours TESOL certificate. Yes, totally, that would totally work. That's great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for addressing that. I was just going to ask that one. Let's see. Cara, how many teaching hours per week do you teach in the public schools versus private? Is there a difference?
Yes, and it's different depending on what your role is. So if you're an ALT, if you go through a JET program or Interact, you will have a lot less teaching hours. I want to say it's about around the 20 hour. And for me, I taught 35 to 40 hours a week. So I was teaching a lot. So if you're in a private school, expect to have your own classroom and be teaching a lot more than public schools, I would say.
Okay, great. There was another question about how many other teachers are there at the same time as you are on assignment in those rural areas?
Oh, that is hard to say. I had some friends who did Jet and Interact, and one of them, he was like the only foreigner in his school. And then there were just a couple, and when I say foreigners, I mean foreign English teachers in his school, and just a few people in his city. There are, if you're from Brazil, there's a large Brazilian population in Japan, which is really neat. My city, I'm really bad with exact numbers, but there was a center for people from other countries, and they offered language classes there. And that's when I got to see, okay, there are quite a few people here. I'm not alone, but I don't know the exact numbers. My school, though, it was like half American teachers, half Japanese teachers. So good balance there.
Okay, perfect. That's good to know. All right, you guys, I love these questions. Keep them coming. I'm going to switch real quick to some of the ones I got in earlier, but if you keep thinking of them, ask away. Promise you I will get to all of them. So we had another question about if you don't want to be employed in Japan, is it possible to volunteer, like either in a social setting or maybe at a sports event?
That's a really great question. Actually, when I went back to Japan for 3 months on a tourist visa. They do have workaway in Japan. They have places you can volunteer, but oftentimes for something like workaway, you need a work visa, which I don't, but if you contact people directly or join the expat group, float that idea out there. I know some people who have done au pair work, which I don't think they had a work visa for that. So there are some other options. I wish I could speak more towards that, but um, yeah, I would say message the place directly and join an expat group.
Okay, that's perfect. And I know you mentioned that one, I think that was called TEN, the Facebook group,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
that's a really good one.
And is that where you would find it? Because we've had a couple questions about the partner visa process and if you're in a relationship and
Yes.
you want the partner to come with, is that kind of where you would get that as well? Or do you have any insights into that?
I have just the insight from one of my friends who worked in Japan. He had a work visa, and they were able to provide a visa for his partner as well. So I do believe that's an option. I think it might be dependent on the company that you're working for,
Okay.
but I'm not an expert.
Yeah. So do your research with who you're going with, reach out to the expat groups and all else fails, they can reach back out to you and you can maybe point them in the right direction. Okay. Switching gears a little bit. So how vegan friendly is it? Do you know?
Oh, okay. Actually, yeah. It's a little tricky because of fish sauce. So one of my best friends in Japan, he's was vegan and found that very difficult in Japan. So he switched to being vegetarian, and I think things are starting to change. I have two friends who started an Instagram just for vegetarians and vegans in Japan. Once I think of their handle, I will put that in the guide. But it is a little bit more difficult. You have to be very specific when you're asking for food, like, okay, is this vegan? And then you have to kind of explain, like, okay, this is what vegan means. Is it vegan? And make sure there's no fish sauce or fish products in it. But temples, if you go visit temples, a lot of monks are following a vegan diet. So yeah, there are some more restaurants around those areas for vegan food.
Okay. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You seem to know it for sure. All right. What was the name of that luxury train you said that might not be for budget travelers, but we might
Oh,
want to try?
yeah, Shinkansen. It's the bullet train.
Bullet train. Okay.
Yeah, tickets can be pricey, but it's so fast and just a really unique experience.
Okay.
Yes, Guillermo, I see it. Yes, it's amazing. It goes super fast. It's so smooth. It's great.
Got to make sure you save for that part, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And then the onsen, is that how you pronounce it?
Onsen.
Onsen. Okay.
Hmm.
So there was a little bit of discussion going on in the chats about this, about if you have tattoos, is it okay to go with that? Or just the general philosophy there or outside in public in general?
Yeah. If you have tattoos, so Japan is a bit more conservative when it comes to tattoos, and especially when the Olympics, planning for the Olympics were coming up, a lot of onsens either stated like, don't, you cannot bathe here if you have a tattoo, or you are welcome here if you have tattoos. So I had friends with tattoos and they ended up just covering them each time that they went. But sometimes if you have a big one, it's harder to do that. So you'll have to check on the website ahead of time just to find that out. Yeah, but you should still try to go, and you can get a private experience. So if you have tattoos, that's an option.
Okay, that's perfect. I love it.
Mhm.
Good options. All right, switching back now to kind of the teaching. So when you're teaching, do the schools provide, I know you mentioned, that there's that apartment that you had to pay for. Do they actually provide it? Do you have to find it? How do you go about that?
It depends. And I know that's an annoying answer, but my company had an apartment building where they placed teachers. And I know some companies do that, or some schools do that, but I think it is more common to find your own apartment and your school will support you in finding that. So yes, especially with the language barrier, if you get hired to teach in Japan, they will usually assign somebody to kind of guide you with those more difficult tasks.
Okay, perfect. Did you have any friends that when you were there that lived in the city, and was the cost for those apartments so much more expensive?
Yeah, I did have a friend who lived in Nagoya, which is a bigger city, and I think the range, I did write this down. So I know for smaller apartments, like 800, probably around 800 US dollars.
So a
The
little bit more.
Yeah, the big cost though is the key money, which you pay like a deposit, but it's more like a gift to the landlord and you don't get that money back. And that is like around $1,500. Um, so your initial moving costs are going to be a big bulk at first. You'll pay a bit more.
Gotcha. And
Yeah,
that's for no matter where you live, or that's
yeah.
just in the city?
Hmm.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Another question. We have so many questions, you guys. This is amazing. I love it. What's the approximate cost of the Japanese classes in the international centers that you mentioned?
Oh, mine were free. Mine were free. If you have, so when you move to Japan, you'll be given a residence card. And if you just showed that, mine were free. Others I think are pretty low cost because a lot of Japanese people are so excited that you're there and to share their culture, that most of them are made to be free. However, I also took classes online with italki. I met one of my best friends on there, and did kind of like a free tutoring language exchange on there. Hello Talk is also a really great app to use to practice any language. That's a good one too, and it's free
Okay,
usually.
awesome. We love those free options. Do you know if currently Japan is open for work visas for teachers?
Okay, this is a tricky one. Japan is very closed right now. Even students who left for vacation and the pandemic hit, they are still stuck abroad. But I do know some people who are hiring and they're hiring overseas, and there is a there's a 2 week, maybe it's less than 2 week quarantine process. I feel like I can't speak well to this, but I do know if you follow, there's a teacher called the Paper Pat on Instagram. He's a teacher in Japan and he just traveled back from the US. So he talks you through like the COVID testing quarantine process. Some places are hiring, but now is not ideal. But I do have hope that within the next 6 months, it will be more open, but definitely still apply. I know the JET program is still taking, or they just closed their applications, but they took people for this coming school year. So, yeah.
Great, perfect recommendations. So what was the most challenging thing for you while you were living there?
Um, I don't know if you picked up on this through video, but I'm a very bubbly person. I like to wear bright colors. I found for myself personally, I found it difficult wearing a suit every day, going to work, and kind of feeling like um, that group putting the group ahead of yourself is really great in some ways, and in other ways, it can be a challenge. But I did my best to kind of adapt to where I was. That was a challenge. And the language barrier, um, you will get stared at quite often, especially if you're in a more rural area, just because you're not Japanese, and people might be a little scared to talk to you, but other people will be super friendly. And so it just depends. It's different for everyone, I'm sure.
Yep, definitely, for sure it is.
Mhm.
So I know when I gave the intro, I mentioned that you are a mental health advocate. So were you able to do any of that while you were over in Japan?
Mm, um, I think occasionally, not like officially, but because it could be kind of isolating being in Japan, and because that can take a big toll on mental health, that was when motivation for me wanting to host gatherings or apartment or parties in my apartment. Um, I would also just kind of plan out going on walks with different coworkers and talking about these things, because sometimes you do feel alone, and it's nice to have somebody from your same cultural background to work through those things. Because yeah, although you can access therapy and counseling in Japan in English in bigger cities, and then via like phone, you can do like Zoom calls too. So that's definitely an option too.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so a couple more questions just in specific in terms of teaching there. So I know you mentioned, you do have to come from an English native speaking country.
Mhm.
Are there any ways to get around that? Does that, if you're not from an English speaking country, does that lower your chances of getting a job there?
It it lowers your chances of being an English teacher.
Okay.
But it's not impossible, especially when they're in a bind. So I think you're more likely to get hired with a private conversation school, because each private school has their own company policies and cultures. So look on Gaijin Pot, and they will normally list where you're more likely to find a job with that
That's a
background.
great tip. Maybe you can jot that down before the end of the call,
Yes.
because I'm not sure if I'll spell it correctly.
All right. Let me make sure I spell it correctly. Yeah, Gaijin.
Yeah, perfect. And then I know you kind of gave, age maybe 21 to 60 or so. Is there a preferred
Oh, that's
age for the English teachers, or did you notice any difference in that?
I think I mean, I think a lot of people right out of college get hired pretty frequently. So more on the younger end, but that's not to say that you can't find a job um, if you're a bit older as well. Um, yeah, I think yeah, I mean, no matter what your age, just apply. Yeah, and especially Japan has a lot of respect for the elderly or hierarchy again. So um, it just depends. Yeah, and it may affect the age group that you teach. I will say that probably.
Okay, that's a good point. But yeah, don't let age stop you. Just
Yeah,
go for it, and
go, go, go.
yeah, go for it. See what you can do. Um, okay, we've got a few more questions. You guys, thank you all so much for all the questions. These are all so good. So, in your opinion, what do you think is the best way to start teaching classes or tutoring English online?
Oh, oh, check out my
Maybe,
first presentation with the Nomadic Network. I covered a lot of that, but to start, get your TESOL or TEFL certificate, and then I listed some of those platforms on one of the slides, but reach out to me. I can even help you with the application process for that.
Okay, perfect. Because I think they were curious about a focus on Japan too. So yeah, you
Oh,
guys, oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, just message me because there are a couple platforms that are specific to Japan. I'm blanking on them right now, but and yes, you can get a copy of the slides if you um, oh, I forgot what your what the nomadic network policy is, but I can give you some if you sign up for my email list on my website. And I think if you're a part of the Patreon community as well, you may have access to this, right?
Yeah, and also I would think that for anyone that is on this call too, we can send the presentation out to them as well.
Yeah.
We can get you that information. And if you don't hear from us, then just ask as well. We can always figure out a way to get it to you. Okay, a couple more questions. So what is the religious tolerance like in Japan?
Oh, great question. Hmm, I I think it may be difficult. So for me, when I went, I remember thinking I wanted to find a church, and there were just a couple Catholic churches. For mosques, I know they're in Tokyo. You're more likely in bigger cities to find a place to practice your religion. But I will say, I've had some friends mention having some difficulty with feeling a little bit ostracized. Yeah, that Shintoism is one of the religious practices in Japan. But a lot of Japanese people that I've met will say, oh, we're not religious, but there are a lot of like traditions embedded in the culture that stem from religion. That's a great question. I wish I could answer that more.
Oh, you're great. I mean, I feel like you know so much. You know so much more than the rest of us. So you've been such a wealth of information and knowledge on this for us. So thank you. It's incredible.
Thanks for great questions.
Okay, so now you might not know this one, but do you know of many people moving to Japan and teaching Spanish?
Oh, okay. I It's possible you can definitely do that. There's someone I follow on YouTube. She has a podcast too. I think it's Mi Miku Real Japanese. And on her YouTube channel, she has brought on people who teach Spanish um, in Japan, but most of them are Japanese. But you can definitely look at gaijin pot and jobs in Japan to get hired because a lot of people do study Spanish in Japan. Yeah.
Okay, I love it. It's great. Cross languages, perfect.
Yes.
So I think this might be the last question. I feel like I've answered them all or I've asked you them all. If anyone on the call, if I missed your question, feel free to drop it in right now in the chat box, or if not, you can always reach out to me separately. I know there were a lot of questions about organizations you worked with. I know a lot of that was on your slide, so hopefully everyone can get that too. But I think the last question I have is, what is a reasonable amount that you paid for these certifications, the TEFL certifications?
Okay, so the ones that I would recommend is between 120 and 150-hour TEFL certificate program. For teaching online, I would recommend a cheaper one if you've taught before. But for the in-person programs where you get that in-person training, I want to say they're a little pricey. I think the max is like $800. Minimum would be like 200 about, but I think they're worth it because sometimes when you get hired to work in Japan, there may not be training. You may just be thrown into the classroom. And if you don't have that exposure to teaching, it can be really daunting. So yeah, definitely check out the listings on ITA's website. Yeah, International TEFL Academy. They should have those prices listed.
Okay, perfect. Oh my goodness, such great information from that just span the gamut. I mean, of everything, of if we want to live there or work there or just have fun there. So thank you. And we can tell how passionate you are about this. And hopefully you've convinced some of us to go when it opens.
Let's all go together when it
Yes,
opens.
when it opens. I know we haven't had any questions about that, but I know how do we know, right? We just have to wait and get those cheap flights and then get there someday.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for sharing and asking such